Welcome everyone to today's devotion. We are in Luke chapter 12, which, if my memory serves me right, there's 24 chapters in Luke, which means after today, we are halfway through the Gospel of Luke. So again, just how quickly you can go through a book. Just one chapter a day is quite significant. What I think the best way to summarize Luke 12 would be to emphasize its emphasis on living in light of the next life, if you will, or at least living in such a way that we are looking up, that our eyes are on heaven. Now, immediately there is an objection to that. It's an old objection that has never really worked, but has stuck around, and that is that if you are so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. The problem with that is a little thing called history and theology. C.S. Lewis makes a big deal of this in Mere Christianity, that if you were to look at those who made the greatest impact on the present world, it was those who were living in the hopes of the next world. There is a correlation between looking up, and which allows you to look out. But if all your hope is here on earth, what you're going to find is you're not looking out, you're looking in. And so Jesus here, one of the major themes of this chapter is his call for us to keep our eyes on Jesus, to keep our eyes on the life that is to come. And with that perspective comes a life lived here that is in greater wisdom and benefit. So he begins here by highlighting the hypocrisy of the religious elites. So starting in the end of verse 1, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. It's kind of nice when he gives a metaphor and he immediately explains it. Nothing is covered up that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed on the housetops. So right away, Jesus is condemning the theology and actions of the religious elites. He'll have more to say about this later in the chapter, but so it's concerned with the leaven of hypocrisy, is that a little leaven leavens the whole lump. It may start small, but then it spreads. And his point here is that the Pharisees present themselves as holy and righteous, but inwardly are unrighteous. Right? Their eyes are not on things above, but things here on earth. And that is what leads him in verse 4. I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who, after he is killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. So if we're keeping our eyes on above, one thing that we will guard against is hypocrisy, right? That's his condemnation to the Pharisees. Another is that is priority, right? So if our eyes are on above, we're not going to fear man, rather we will fear God. And so we're not going to try to save ourselves or save or things that really at the end of the day don't matter, which means we won't live for things that do not matter. It's striking that how in this chapter Jesus is concerned with the future well-being of his disciples, because he anticipates their suffering, and they're all going to suffer. And so in order to deal with the issue of suffering, Jesus tells them to look above. Anticipate what is to come. And so in so doing, we guard from both hypocrisy and fear. Don't fear those who can hurt the body. Fear him who can destroy the soul. Another example of this, of how being heavenly minded, if you will, benefits us here on earth, is if you go down to verse 13, it helps us when it comes to possessions. You can live a life of generosity, or you can live a life of greed. And here Jesus condemns the life of greed. So he tells a parable. He's approached by a man who says, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. So if you have ever ministered to a family who have just lost a loved one, you've had these conversations before. It is very difficult to not get involved with family affairs. They get quite ugly, especially when money and possessions are involved. Family members will divide over wealth. They will not divide over things that truly matter. We are greedy people to our core. And that's what this guy's having. He said, look, My brother's supposed to divide the inheritance, and he hasn't done it. And I love this. Jesus says, who made me the judge or arbiter over you? In other words, it's not my business. Boy, if only more Americans lived like that, right? If we could cut down on the drama in this country, I think we would be better off. But verse 15, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And notice what Jesus said there. He's not saying that it's not unjust that his brother is being greedy. What he is saying is that in light of such an injustice, watch your own heart. What we do typically today is we say, because someone has wronged me, that now justifies sin. That justifies unrighteous acts. Jesus says, no, just because what has been done to you may be wrong and illegal does not justify you breaking the 10th commandment of covetousness. So by coming to me thinking that I'm going to side with you or I'm going to be an arbitrator between, it shows me that your love for wealth is not good. Okay? It's a helpful way to really think, because we don't think about things in that way. When we think of, well, I've been wronged, now any response is a justified response. Well, no, not at all. You can't control what other people do. You can control your response to them. Right? And that is a really helpful thing that Jesus offers here. But then he tells a parable about greed. It's the parable of a man he's a very productive farmer. And so he's a rich man who produces a lot. And he says to himself, "Self, what shall I do? I have nowhere to store my crops." And he said, "I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. There I will store all my grain and my goods." Right? And then his goal is to eat, drink, and be merry. All right? He's going to retire at a young age, and he is just going to enjoy the wealth that he has accumulated. And Jesus here condemns the man. He says, today your soul will be taken from you. What he's saying there is again, if you are looking on things above, you will not spend your life gratifying and satisfying the self. So instead of being greedy, you will be generous. And so whether we're talking about wealth or other areas, if we keep our eyes on above and on the things that truly matter, then that will guard our heart from things like covetousness and greed. And we can look at other ones as well. So being heavenly minded helps us in terms of hypocrisy. It helps us regarding fear, helps us regarding generosity, helps us regarding anxiety. Verse 22, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. So notice here that if you don't deal with the greed issue, the covetousness issue, your life will be consumed with anxiety. Look, the day will come, you will die, and you will no longer care about your wealth. You'll no longer care about food or clothes or fashion or Instagram followers. You're just not going to care about any of that anymore. And if that's the case, then why do we care so much about it today? Look to your heavenly Father, who is sovereign over everything, who will provide for you food and clothing. But do not be consumed with these things. Because in being consumed with these things, then that is going to stir up anxiety in your heart. Don't be anxious about these things. Don't be anxious about your life. Rather, fear Him, who can not only take body, but also soul. Well, one last thing. My goal was to cut it short today, and sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. But starting in verse 35, stay dressed for action, keep your lamps burning, be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. The message there is quite obvious, that if you are heavenly minded and thus earthly good, you are living in anticipation that your master shall return. And so he warns, verse 45, if that servant says to himself, my master is delayed in coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat, drink, and get drunk, which connects us to the story about the rich man who was to eat, drink, and be merry. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know. So again, he's saying that if your focus is on Christ above, and you know the day will come when he will return and gather to himself his elect, then we will not be taken by surprise. Rather, we will live a life consistent with the gospel, which takes us back to the beginning. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees, who live by hypocrisy. And here at the end, he's saying, don't be consumed with hypocrisy. Live a life consistent of grace. But that's only going to happen if we keep our eyes on Jesus, if we are heavenly minded. And when we're heavenly minded, we will be earthly good. See you guys, Lord willing, here tomorrow.